Heritage Education Network Belize Culture Symposium, Community Issues and Innovative Practices. Make sure you join with our Facebook and YouTube. I want to there, you better there.
Allah we know that you are there.
Good morning, Belize, and good morning, good afternoon, and good night to our friends and supporters from across the globe. A warm welcome to the 4th annual Belize Culture Symposium organized by Heritage Education Network Belize. Culture is back. I'm your host for this morning's session, Alessandra Villarreal. First and foremost, we need to give a shout out to Mr. Alexander Evans for our amazing introductory music that he performed and recorded for Culture. It has become our theme song over the years. Thank you, Mr. Evans. We'd like to also thank you, our viewers and supporters, for joining us for the 4th year of our symposium. This symposium is brought to you by Heritage Education Network Belize, a non-governmental, nonprofit organization dedicated to culture and heritage through education, capacity building, and advocacy. HENB, as we call it, is founded by Ms. Ella Bekeshi, Ms. April Martinez, Dr. Rebecca Friedel-Wan, and Ms. Sylvia Batty. While these 4 founders all have formal training in archaeology, they also have a diversity of backgrounds and experience. Yet in some form or another, they've all come to dedicate their lives to conducting heritage research and outreach in Belize and creating actionable change from those efforts. In the 4.5 years since Heritage Education Network Belize was established, it has grown to become a community of over 3,500 people interested in culture, heritage, and Belize. HENB's mission is to safeguard and promote culture and heritage as a means to sustainability, and this mission is not achievable without open dialogue and the support and participation of our constantly growing community. The Culture Symposium represents the manifestation of this mission in many ways. The 2024 Belize Culture Symposium is focusing on Belize's sustainable orange economy, nationally and internationally. What is the orange economy? As the United Nations Economist Network states, the creative economy, also known as the orange economy, is an evolving concept based on the contribution and potential of creative assets to contribute to economic growth and development. It embraces economic, cultural, and social aspects, interacting with technology, intellectual property, and tourism objectives. With this in mind, this year's overall theme aims to look at the creative economies of the past, present, and future in order to understand ancient and modern examples to ensure a sustainable future. We encourage presenters to connect and rethink their research in light of what it means to the creative sector. In these next 2 days, we will create a virtual space for everyone to engage in interdisciplinary dialogue, bridge boundaries between academia and the public, and showcase the relevance of Belizean language, culture, heritage, archaeology, anthropology, and the arts to daily life and global issues. Each session is curated around a theme. We'll conclude with an open question and answer session so that anyone and everyone can be a part of this knowledge exchange. What we hope will become clear is that at the heart of this symposium and our organization is a celebration of the diversity of human experience and the opportunity for us to pivot our public dialogue surrounding this diversity to focus on understanding and inclusivity. The knowledge shared here will live on longer than these 2 days in an accessible and digital library for the public in an effort to foster this inclusivity and to empower our citizens to better understand the work that is being done to highlight the archaeology, history, and modern cultural issues shaping Belize and our broader world. We hope that you will continue to join us on our journey and to achieve these goals, and we welcome all to participate in the coming days or at any point in the future. Thank you for being here with us for this much anticipated event. And finally, on behalf of the directors of HENB, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to all the volunteers and presenters who are helping to make this event possible. and to all the wonderful people who have supported our initiatives. As a volunteer-led event, the symposium is not made possible by dollars or grants, but through our volunteers' passion and love for Belize. We do hope that you enjoy the next 2 days, and thank you for tuning in. We will now present to you our keynote for this year's symposium, given by Mr. K.U.L.C.H.A. Mr. Quiros is currently the Executive Director of Beltrade, Belize Trade and International Development Service, having previously been the Private Sector Development Analyst in Belize at the Inter-American Development Bank, or IDB, for almost a decade between 2010 and 2017. He is a communicator and reformer who brings over 20 years of professional experience spanning a broad range of fields and areas of expertise, including innovation, operations management, corporate governance, project design and implementation, strategy, policy formulation, and socioeconomic development from international, public, and private sector perspectives. He also served as the Director of Public-Private Sector Dialogue in the Office of the Prime Minister of Belize between 2017 and 2024, heading the Technical Secretariat operationalizing the work of the Economic Development Council, or EDC, Belize's primary forum for dialogue between public and private sectors. During his tenure as the executive director for the EDC, he chaired or was otherwise integral to numerous technical working groups and projects, including chairing the Consolidation and Modernization of Belize's Companies Act, the Sustainable Development Plan for the Chiquibul Mountain Pine Ridge Caracol Complex project, as well as the modernization of Belize's debt recovery regime. He also took part in the Secured Transactions and Collateral Registry Working Group, the Belize Investment and Business Climate Action Plan, or BIBCAP, the Virtual Assets and Service Providers Technical Working Group, and Belize's Trade Negotiation Team and Trade Facilitation Committee. On top of all of this, Mr. Quiros also contributed to Belize's comprehensive National Transportation Master Plan, the Capacity Building for Public Transport Reform Project, the Digital Technology for Improving the Business Climate in Belize Project, and Innovation Platforms for Social and Economic Impact. This impressive resume has led Mr. Quiros's led to his present position as the Executive Director of the Belize Trade and Investment Development Service, Beltrade, a statutory board and business support agency with the official mandate for investment and trade promotion with a focus on MSME and professional development. Mr. Quiros is a two-term president of the Rotary Club of Belmopan, a member of the board of Belize Audubon Society, and an entrepreneur in his own right. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in corporate management from Anglia Ruskin University in Essex, England, and a Master's of Science degree in economics from Galen University, Belize. He has also undertaken paralegal studies at the University of the West Indies, UWI Open Campus, and is passionate about PPPs, behavioral economics, sustainable development, public policy, effective communication, the facilitation of dialogue, foreign languages, travel, art history, and the creative and cultural industries. Today, we have the distinct pleasure of featuring a keynote introduction by Mr. Ismael Quiros, and we're honored to have a few remarks from him now.
Buiti Binafi, buen dia, and good morning to all of the participants at the 2024 K.U.L.C.H.A Symposium. A special thank you to the Heritage Education Network Belize for organizing this significant event. It is an honor for me to stand before you today to discuss the theme of Belize's sustainable orange economy. Fun fact, as the story goes, the term orange economy was first coined by the former Colombian president Iván Duque Márquez and the culture minister at the time. Inspired by the visual of a handmade clay jug containing water, they reflected and both mused that the vessel was of basic tangible use, but became so much more valuable, sweeter, and beautiful at the thought of it containing delicious, fresh, and nutritious orange juice. Belize's culture, creativity, and heritage form the bedrock of our orange economy. This sector encompasses diverse fields such as music, art, fashion, gastronomy, and digital content creation, and serves not only as a reflection of our national identity, but also as a vital contributor to economic growth. Today, I am pleased to share with you how Beltrade is working diligently to nurture these creative industries, ensuring that they continue to thrive and contribute meaningfully to the national economy and the global market. The roots of creativity in Belize run deep, stretching back to antiquity and the times of the ancient Maya civilization. For centuries, our indigenous people have expressed their identity through art, music, and craftsmanship, laying the foundation of what we now call the orange economy. From weaving intricate textiles to preserving oral traditions through storytelling, creativity has historically served as both a form of cultural expression and a source of economic sustenance. Today, Belize continues to build upon this rich legacy, our cultural diversity, from the powerful beats of Garifuna and maroon drumming to the vibrant mestizo dances and rich Creole folklore, represents a dynamic cultural tapestry. At Beltrade, efforts are underway to preserve, promote, and elevate these traditions while ensuring the industries that emerge from them remain sustainable contributors to national economic development. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Beltrade, with the invaluable support of Taiwan ICDF, launched the Belize Female Entrepreneurship Program, an initiative designed to provide COVID-19 relief to female entrepreneurs in emerging industries like music and seaweed production. 10 women received business diagnostics and improvement plans, working closely with branding and marketing consultants to develop websites, electronic press kits, business cards, and promotional videos. Each entrepreneur was awarded $3,000 in seed capital to mitigate losses, increase working capital, and expand their businesses. Beltrade's export business advisors ensured these funds were invested sustainably, supporting business growth and expanding services across Belize and beyond. The COVID relief program saw success stories come from local Belizean artist Melanie Gillett, who, through this project, was able to take her work to new heights, expanding her market reach and improving her brand visibility. Chanel Parks used the funds to obtain equipment to improve the quality of her videos and recordings, allowing her to focus on debuting her original music to the world. Denise Castillo has rebranded and introduced new revenue streams through merchandising. These achievements serve as proof that with the right support, Belize's creative talents can overcome challenges and seize new opportunities. The relief provided during the pandemic was pivotal to keeping Belize's creative industries alive, and our continued collaboration with Taiwan ICDF remains crucial. The music industry is another vital component of Belize's orange economy. For decades, Belizean musicians such as the Garifuna Collective have drawn inspiration from Caribbean, African, and indigenous cultures, creating unique sounds that resonate with audiences both locally and globally. However, the music industry is evolving rapidly, particularly with the rise of digital platforms. At Beltrade, through our Business of Music program, the focus has been on helping musicians navigate this shifting landscape by offering training in intellectual property rights, digital marketing, and music production. These efforts aim to ensure that Belizean musicians are not only talented performers, but also knowledgeable business owners equipped to capitalize on digital tools and streaming platforms. Beyond music, Belizean fashion designers and cultural artisans are playing an increasingly important role in the orange economy. Fashion in Belize blends modern styles with traditional elements, creating unique pieces that are gaining attention on the international stage. Bel.Trade has worked closely with these designers to facilitate access to global markets, promoting Belize's unique fashion identity. These artisans include Lisa Carr Cáceres of the Belize Banana Fibers, Zaya Sarai, and Emilio Pereira, among others. Cultural artisans who produce handcrafted items such as jewelry, textiles, and pottery are vital to preserving Belize's tangible heritage while also contributing to the economy. Bel.Trade's initiatives have provided training in branding, packaging, and export readiness, allowing these artisans to compete internationally while maintaining the authenticity of their craft. One such artisan who recently gained international recognition through a U.S. Embassy-funded program for handcrafted jewelry made from natural Belizean materials is K.U.L.C.H.A Expressions. With continued business support, artisans can continue to showcase their products at an international trade show, opening new markets, and strengthening Belize's cultural exports. Sustaining Belize's orange economy requires strong global partnerships. Bel.Trade has fostered collaborations with organizations such as Taiwan ICDF, Compete Caribbean, Senpromipe, and She Trades, ensuring Belize's creative industries are positioned for future growth. These partnerships focus on building digital infrastructure, expanding market access, and securing financing for MSMEs, all while ensuring environmental and economic sustainability. Sustainability in this context goes beyond protecting natural resources. It also means ensuring the long-term viability of Belize's creative industries. These industries preserve cultural heritage, generate employment, and contribute to economic growth. Belize's orange economy stands at the intersection of cultural preservation and economic development. With continued investment, strategic international partnerships, and the unwavering support of organizations like Bel.Trade, Belize's creative industries will continue to flourish. From our musicians and fashion designers to our cultural artisans, the future is bright for those ready to innovate and contribute to the growth of the orange economy. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to engaging on this very exciting topic.
Thank you, Mr. Quiros, for your insight into orange economy, culture, and sustainability. It was very interesting to hear your perspective on multiple creative endeavors like music and fashion and the role they play not only on the national stage, but on the international cultural and economic stage as well. By highlighting the role of the ancient, historic, and modern creative efforts from across Belize's diversity of cultural expressions, you've provided an insightful overview of what's to come in the next 2 days. I would like to say good morning and welcome to any viewers just joining us. It is my pleasure to now kick off the first of many of our sessions for our symposium. We're starting our exploration of Belizean culture with a focus on our past to highlight the rich creative heritage that Belize and this broader region has. This session is entitled Exploring Belize's Past. We're honored to have with us today many experts leading the field in understanding ancient material culture and societies. From textile through ceramics and excavation, each presentation will uncover the socioeconomic complexities of the region. They will help us better understand the vibrant and deep human histories that have been intertwined with material culture, tangible culture, and laid the foundation for the cultural diversity of modern-day Belize. The theme of our first section, Exploring Belize's Past, starts with our first presenter, Ms. Marie Ramoulet. She is a PhD student from the Panthéon-Sorbonne Université, working on Maya archaeology as a textile specialist. If you know anything about the Maya region and its general preservation, having a textile specialist is really exciting for us. Her thesis is based on the study of ancient Maya textiles from the archaeological remains encountered in the Maya area, including Belize, Mexico, and Guatemala. We're pleased to have Ms. Ramoulet open our Culture Symposium with her presentation titled on the edge of discovery, unveiling ancient Maya archaeological textiles.
I'm Marie Ramoulet, a PhD student from France, and I'm an archaeologist and textile specialist. I'm going to present you some reasons why textiles were of highest importance within ancient Maya material culture and economy. The Maya area covers a total surface of some 324,000 kilometers square. It covers the first 5,000 states of Mexico, Chiapas, Tabasco, Campeche, Quintana Roo, and Yucatan, Guatemala, Belize, western Honduras, and Salvador. It is traditionally bordered to the west by the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in Mexico and to the east by the Lampa and Salvador rivers. It's part of a much larger cultural area, Mesoamerica. The Maya reached their apogee between the 17th and 9th centuries after Christ, during what is traditionally known as the Late Classic period. At that time, the Maya world developed complex social, political, economic, and religious systems dominated by centralized political authorities within city-states. A social stratification based on two distinct classes was established, the elite and the non-elite, with an equal access to the various resources available. The daily activities of members of Mayan society, as in any hierarchical community, varied according to the status of the individual. Each had a specific function in preserving the economic and political order, and gender, age, and activity defined the everyday life of each individual. In this system, one of the major activities was textile production. Carved monuments show a wide variety of textiles and garments worn by queens and kings, also represented on the extraordinary ceramics decorated with courtly scenes or murals in the most important buildings of the cities, while thousands of figurines show clothing worn by people from all social and economic classes. Textiles represented status both for those who wore them and those who made them. Most elaborate artifacts were worn by the highest royalty, but were also used for trade. They were even offered to the Spanish invaders by the elites of central Mexico and Mayan states, as recorded in some colonial chronicles. Spinning and weaving was one of the tasks generally associated with femininity and was carried out on a daily basis. Textiles production took place mainly in the domestic space and all socio-economic levels, but was developed in more specialized way in high-ranking houses complexes. The main source of fiber for Mayan textile was cotton. Other plants were used, such as several species of agaves, although their use were probably less frequent in the Maya area than in other parts of Mesoamerica, such as central Mexico. Warping occurred as an important step in the technical process of Maya textile production. Examples from both iconographic sources and modern communities attest to the diversity of warping frames, both in their composition, from sticks slanted to the ground to warping boards, and in the number of sticks, generally 2, 3, or 4, although much larger warping frames are attested today. The Madrid Codex offers the only representation of this technical step in the Maya area. Two women are shown unwinding a thread from bobbing onto a warping frame. On the left, the deity of weaving is shown seated, legs crossed, and left hand resting on a horizontal frame with three visible sticks. Lines stretched between the protruding upper parts indicate the presence of thread on the warping frame. The second person is in a similar position, although the warping frame appears to have only two sticks. In both cases, these warping frames are fully comparable to the frames still in use today. Like all Mesoamerican culture for over 2 millennia, ancient Maya societies were using bastrap weaving. Made entirely of perishable materials, Mayan looms had not survived to the present day, and their age is difficult to ascertain. The best preserved example of pre-Columbian Maya weaving is undoubtedly this figurine of the Jaina weaver housed in Mexico City Museo Nacional de Antropología. Discovered in 1964 on the island of Jaina by Hilda Delgado, this figurine represents an elite woman seated with her hand resting on a loom attached at the waist by a belt named mecapal. The woman is shown seated in front of a small tree, to which the second end of the loom is attached by a thick rope. The technical use of bastrap loom did not change much during the centuries, as you can see. Directly associated with their manufacture, one of the first uses of fabric, in their chronological order of the textile chain of operations, is their role as a vehicle of wealth. The first signs of the tribute system in the classic Maya period come from aulic scenes immortalized on numerous polychrome ceramics. These show visitors in position of respect or presentation of goods before members of higher rank, from the ruler to other members of the elite. These visitors are accompanied by numerous packages and wrapped goods, as well as piles of fabric, if very often associated with objects evoking precious goods or symbols of wealth, such as skates of feather or spondylus shells. Some of these packages are sometimes marked by glyphs to identify their contents. The use of the pig glyph associated with cocoa seed come to mind. These scenes are sometimes supported by clear epigraphic mention, Pat or Patan tribute, Tohol payment, or Yupte textile tribute. From an iconographic point of view, these packages are characterized by their round or oval shape. They are also characterized by the wrapping of their content in a fabric rolled several times over, the ends of which are often tied with a simple knot on the top. These packages are depicted alone, often placed next to the other object of tribute, or in direct association with other goods generally placed above the package, perhaps signifying its contents. In all cases, the presence of these packages in iconography may be motivated by the representation of objects corresponding to a physical reality, gift or tribute, or for symbolic purposes evoking an individual wealth. This vase is a typical example. It represents a palatial scene which epigraphy helps us to understand better. A messenger Ebed from the ruler of K.U.L.C.H.A pays homage to one of Tika's sovereigns. Beneath the sovereign's throne, a package is inscribed 3 peaks, 3 per 8,000, which means 24,000 implied cocoa beans. According to David Schwartz, this number corresponds exactly to a lot of cocoa beans in central Mexico in the post-classical period. In addition to these packages, fabrics or pieces are extremely frequent in the aulic scene immortalized on Maya cylinders. Their stereotypes iconography was undoubtedly an echo of standardized material production necessary for exchanges with tributary or monetary value. Large, white, undyed strips with sewn edges, they often appear folded and stacked. In many palatial scenes, white or sometimes two-tone stacks are often depicted. They are sometimes accompanied by unfolded textile pieces, probably to attest their quality to the one who received them. Among the goods present on these ceramic scenes, packets of cocoa beans, quetzal feather and spondylus shell, jade ornaments, fabric are the most recurrent and sometimes appear in a very large number. Moreover, their iconography is fairly stereotyped, echoing the probably stereotyped manufacture of these objects. Rectangular elements with rounded edges and with consistency seems rather fluid. Sometimes the presence of finer lines inside these elements gives them a folded appearance, highlighting their probable textile nature. The striking difference between these fabrics and the manufactured fabrics found in the iconography attests to the standardization of these fabrics. Rather than finished pieces, we're dealing here with raw pieces which, as soon as they come off the loom, acquire a specific exchange value through their neutrality within a context of tribute payment. In our opinion, these facts may induce a break in the fabric's operative chain at some point, the post-creation life being probably determined according to the needs or wishes of the last recipients of these fabrics. In this case, the textiles part becomes, per se, a new raw material. This change of states is made possible by the transitional state through which the textile pieces passes. Like cocoa, it becomes a commodity. This state only comes to an end when one or more of these textile parts is used to create a finished object with specific function and symbolism in a given context. Another thing about what I'm going to speak about is the textile's influence in ceramic. Despite the fact that they are used at every level of an individual life, and most certainly by the host population, fabrics like basketry are characterized by their technical and visual complexity. But even the simplest entanglement technique has another quality, its aesthetic appeal, which makes the final result as much as an art as itself as the creation of the object. This fact is reflected on the use of impression on ceramics, which are distinguished from prints by the intention behind the gesture, that is, by the intentional use of fabric on a decorative tool. One example is this anthropomorphic censer discovered in Amatitlan, Guatemala, and dating from the early preclassic period. Made from molded ceramic, we can see that a finely woven mat was ingeniously used as a printing tool to recreate the basketry element forming the headdress of the individual. However, the most eloquent example was found in Caminaljuyu and represents a pregnant woman whose skin has been printed with a fine weave, which gives it texture but also symbolic, the act of weaving being generally associated with childbirth and procreation. The aesthetic aspects of textiles and mats and their decorative value can be highlighted by the trompe-l'oeil representation on ceramics. These representations are quite rare but well known and precisely reproduce textile techniques and patterns. The precision also reflects the painter's knowledge of these techniques, or at least their increased observation, for a faithful and mimetic representation. These ceramics witness the representation of different parts of the textiles. The old piece, for example, here you have the most famous examples, most probably from which come from Tomb 12 from Rioasu, and which remind us of some textiles encountered represented on mural painting from Calakmul, Mexico. Sometimes only the body of the textile is represented. In this case, the body of the ceramic is associated to the body of the textiles, referring to different kinds of weaving techniques from simple to elaborate knotted one, as you can see on this vessel. Specific parts of the textile piece can be also represented, especially the edges. Selvages as a place for ornamentation. The study of numerous textile representations reveals the importance of these selvages and of the addition on the selvages. Iconography shows that they are a key point for the passage of information and adornment. The presence on whippers on long selvages fringed and decorated with glyphic bands attests to the importance play in both fabric manufacture and final rendering. However, beyond the technical and utilitarian aspects already mentioned, both the final textile forms and the production processes and technical gestures have a strong visual impact, having largely fueled collective imagery in the pre-Columbian period. The high decorative potential of woven and braided form, as well as the complex acts of manufacture and use of utilitarian origin, seems to have been superimposed on major concepts containing the sacred, rebirth and renewal, power, stemming from the ritual, social, and even political system of Maya societies. Combining material data with other sources, notably iconographic and epigraphic, tends to determine how and to what extent textiles, objects, and gesture influence other immaterial and material aspects of Maya culture. To conclude, today, textiles are still among the most complex and rich material production of today's Maya communities. Their representation are also omnipresent in advertising and tourist sites, as well as in everyday life. Textiles are an integral part of today's visual heritage. Our knowledge of archaeological textiles only serves to confirm the importance of the cultural and economic continuity of this production, bearing witness to the incredibly rich millennial heritage preserved.
All right. Thank you, Miss Marie Ramele, for your information presentation
Maya.
on ancient Maya archaeological textiles. It is interesting to consider the similarities and differences between ancient and modern textile practices and their role in their respective economies. Hello, everyone. I am HENB co-director April Martinez here to introduce our next presenter. On this morning's agenda, we have the presentation by Dr. Alessandra Villarreal. Dr. Villarreal recently received her PhD from the University of Texas at San Antonio, where she studied middle pre-classic ceramic production and distribution using multiple analytical techniques. Her interest in early ceramic economies led her to work directly with living Maya potters from the village of San Jose Socots in Cayo, Belize. This collaboration allowed Alessandra to recenter the producers of archaeological ceramic assemblages while highlighting the creation of tangible cultural heritage by ancient and modern potters alike. Our second presentation is Dr. Alessandra Villarreal's Ceramic Production and Distribution, Testing a Middle Classic Ceramic Economy in the Mopan River Valley, Belize. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Villarreal.
Everyone, first I want to thank the organizers at Heritage Education Network Belize for gathering us for another year of engagement and discussion. The past year, I completed my dissertation on the ceramic economy of the Middle Pre-Classic Maya, living in the Mopan River Valley, and I'm incredibly honored to present the results for the first time at the K.U.L.C.H.A Symposium. This project was born out of an interest to better understand the relationship between two sites in the Mopan River Valley during this early period, a time of rapid and significant social, political, and economic change. As you'll see shortly, or are already aware, the sites of early Shenantonich and San Lorenzo are located just across the river from each other and remain mutually visible to this day. Given their close proximity, I wondered what their relationship was during the early period and how this relationship might be reflected in the material record. Based on a theoretical framework of virtual economy and previous excavations at both sites by K.U.L.C.H.A, MVAP, and MVPP, I predicted a slightly uneven relationship between early Shenantonich and San Lorenzo. I hypothesized that early Shenantonich, this monumental pre-classic complex, would have been a node of public activity, drawing in residents of surrounding settlements for community-based rituals and gatherings. In this hypothesis, San Lorenzo was one such settlement. These inter-community events would also have served as the mechanism for circulation of ceramics, with surrounding settlements bringing vessels to the center in participation of these large-scale events. To test this hypothesis, I developed a model that measured these same variables in each assemblage so that I could directly compare them. These markers of production, as I call them, include the paste, form, surface treatment, and firing, representing potters' choices at every stage of ceramic production. These choices, while primarily founded on the knowledge and skill of the potter, are also responsive to the socio-political and economic climates in which ceramics are made, distributed, and used. The variables can be seen here on this chart, which plots a hypothesis-based prediction. In other words, if it were true that residents of San Lorenzo contributed to the ceramic record at early Shenantonich through inter-community gatherings, the material record would yield higher variability in paste recipes, surface treatments, and other aesthetic elements at the monumental center. In this situation, similarly, lower variability would be present within the San Lorenzo assemblage, which was more likely a result of single or intra-community activity. My work ultimately sought to understand how ceramics were produced and circulated across the Mopan River Valley. Testing these complex relationships that involved the multiple moving parts and influences of ceramic production, distribution, and consumption required an equally complex methodology. This investigation included 4 phases: macroscopic, mineralogical, and chemical analyses, as well as ethnoarchaeological collaboration. These methods are displayed this way because the research design recognizes the ability for each type of analysis to complement and inform the others, creating a holistic understanding of the trends in and across both assemblages. I think that this methodology has intrinsic value outside of the model I designed for this project, as it captures data from every stage of ceramic production, from the procurement of raw material to the firing techniques and aesthetic choices of potters. Unfortunately, I don't have time to expand each stage of this project, but would be happy to answer questions afterward. Ceramic material was collected from 2 sites along the Mopan River in the K.U.L.C.H.A district. The Mopan River Valley is part of the larger Upper Belize River Valley, which was dotted with multiple sites in the early and middle pre-classic periods. The interconnectivity of this region, created by its riverine system, influenced the ceramic distribution patterns, both shared and unique, that we see in the material record. The assemblages analyzed in this project are part of a broader east-west distribution of middle pre-classic ceramics, predominantly orange wares across the region. I investigated ceramic materials from 2 sites in this valley, the pre-classic ceremonial center of Shenantonich called Early Shenantonich, and the nearby settlement community of San Lorenzo. By analyzing material from contexts on 2 sociopolitical scales, I sought to offer a new perspective on the complex and interconnected relationships that existed between groups and ceramic producers in the Middle Preclassic Mopon River Valley. Ceramic material offers a robust record of economic processes like resource procurement and distribution. It also, however, lends itself well to the study of past political and social environments within which the material was created and used. The relationships between material, producer, and consumer are embedded into the clay body itself. Investigating these relationships, as this research ultimately strived to do, not only provides a more nuanced observation of the past, but also recenters the potter and the influences their social, political, and economic realities had on every stage of production. To test these relationships via the ceramic record, I analyzed quite large assemblages from early Shenantonich and San Lorenzo at varying scales of intensity. Some level of macroscopic analysis or observation with the naked eye was performed on every sherd in both assemblages, totaling more than 4,600. I analyzed a number of different attributes for every sherd, but I want to highlight some of the characteristics that were most indicative of these markers of production. Again, I expected there to be an obvious difference between the sites here based on my model and hypothesis. However, many of the measurements were distributed fairly evenly. The assemblages from early Shenantonich and San Lorenzo have very little variation between them. In truth, the only macroscopic measure that had real variability was paste texture. I measured paste texture based on grain size from very coarse to very fine, and the apparent firing environment based on the hardness of the paste. For example, very fine, high-fired individuals, like the one seen on the bottom right of the screen, were very well sorted with almost no visible inclusions. The pastes were hard to scratch, and the sherd made a distinct clinking sound when tapped on the table. Importantly, these very fine, almost vitrified pastes were found almost exclusively at early Shenantonich, while San Lorenzo contained more coarse-grained wares with a tendency towards softer fine wares. In general, macroscopic analysis has revealed a few important characteristics of these assemblages. First, there's less discernible difference across the assemblages than I expected given my hypothesis. In fact, both assemblages measure up to broader regional trends for type and form during the early Middle Preclassic period. It's in the paste and decorative decisions that these assemblages stand out, not only from regional trends, but distinguish themselves from each other. A further significant finding of the macroscopic phase of analysis is the definition of a new type in the Middle Preclassic Mopon River Valley. Magana gray, which I named after potters David and Estrella Magana, is defined by gray surface treatment, usually in the form of a wash or thin slip and high-fired paste. Where surfaces are eroded, the characteristic red or red-orange paste is visible. Almost all examples are high-fired, potentially pointing to paste vitrification and type-specific paste recipes. Decoration is limited to geometric incising on vessel exteriors, both pre and post-slip, with a few examples of post-fire incising. Magana gray is likely related to the Mars orange ware so prominent across the upper Belize River Valley. In form and decoration, Magana gray would fit squarely within Mars orange as a new variety of Savannah or Reforma. However, the gray surface treatment is too consistent to simply be considered fire-clouded Mars orange, especially as fire-clouded Mars orange examples exist in these assemblages. Close comparanda to Magana gray was encountered at K.U.L.C.H.A, described by Peniche Mai as unnamed black ceramic. However, distinctions in decorative technique and design delineate the types from each other. Chemical signatures produced through NAA further support the production of this type in the Mopon River Valley. Taken together, these characteristics suggest that the producers of Magana gray were following regional trends in form and decoration, but made different choices at critical stages of production, including surface treatment and firing regimen. After macroscopic analysis was completed, sherds were sorted by paste, including color, texture, and visible inclusions, so that a sample could be taken for the next phase of analysis. A total of 172 samples were chosen from these groups and exported for the production of thin sections. 4 additional samples of architectural daub were exported as well in order to create a control of locally available clay that likely underwent minimal to little processing before its use as daub in the Middle Preclassic. Thin section petrography was used to define ratios of clay to inclusions in the ceramic material, ratios that I then used to highlight potting units who favored specific ceramic recipes. Investigation of thin sections also provides important information about the production process. Some ingredients like specific minerals or culturally added temper tell us about resource procurement and the organization of production, while others like grog, clay mixing, and voids, which you see on the right, tell us about the actual clay preparation and vessel formation. To better visualize the distribution of inclusions within these samples, I conducted multiple statistical analyses on petrographic data. The one I want to focus on today is the ternary plot, which is shown on the left, and I'm happy to discuss other results in the future, however, if anyone has more specific questions. So on the left is the ternary plot, which visualizes the relationship between 3 variables, thus ternary, in a given sample. The one shown here assesses the ratio of quartzite, volcanic ash, and grog in all sherds tested. Using different mineral variables on the 3 axes changes the spatial distribution or spatial relationship between the samples and really highlights the effects that specific inclusions have on the way samples relate to each other, like statistically. I built a lot of ternary plots for my dissertation, and all the plots that included volcanic ash on one of the axes distributed in incredibly similar ways. So note here how the distribution of samples lines up by site on the volcanic axis. While most samples have a relatively high proportion of quartzite, it's the volcanic axis that gives us the most informative relationship. And it's important to note here that the more natural samples, so architectural daub and locally available clays, contain no volcanic material. So this indicates that this inclusion type is not found in the immediate surrounding raw materials. The final phase of analysis tested the chemical signatures of sherds using a technique called neutron activation analysis, or NAA. NAA, prepared by Dr. Goodwin at the University of Missouri Research Reactor, resulted in 5 distinct chemical signature clusters, with a few unassigned and outlying individuals. The distribution of groups is very exciting to both me and the group at MER, as you can see in the biplot, the graph on the left, as well as the table to the right. Groups are delineated by site and type. Daub from both sites form its own group. Groups A and B are most intriguing. Here we see an absolute delineation of Mars orange wares by site. As noted by Dr. Goodwin, this is not only rare in the Upper Belize River Valley, but rare between 2 sites so geographically close to each other, sites that likely had similar raw materials nearby, as evidenced by like-grouped daub. The sherds in these assemblages follow regional trends in form and surface treatment, which I found through the macroscopic analysis, and likely use the same iron-rich clays, again, that note towards the daub group, but it's in the paste recipe, those added inclusions, that these sherds differ enough to be delineated. This means that potters responsible for the vessels at each site had their own preferred recipes and were not sharing those recipes across the Mopon River. I initially hypothesized that early Shinantinich's relationship with San Lorenzo would be reflected clearly in the ceramic record. However, through formal typological, mineralogical, and chemical examination of both assemblages, I discovered the relationship between the sites entailed a more nuanced configuration. While early Shinantinich and San Lorenzo were both supplied by site-specific producers, there was no evidence of San Lorenzo pottery at the site center. According to multiple lines of evidence, as I've explained here, the markers of production in both assemblages relate in the following ways. So you can follow along on the chart as I read these out. The variability of paste groups and paste recipes is slightly higher at early Shanantanich, likely owing to evidence of regional and interregional exchange. The elaboration of surface treatments and decoration are equal at both sites, with a small portion of both assemblages containing complex motifs. And finally, there were no overlapping chemical signatures between early Shanantanich and San Lorenzo. These correlates could suggest one of two possibilities. Either the relationship between the two sites was not materialized in the ceramic record, or San Lorenzo did not participate in the inter-community activities represented at early Shanantanich. The ceramic record at San Lorenzo does, however, indicate the site-specific production of fineware serving vessels, some elaborated with symbolic motifs of the kind likely used in intra-community or local ritual practices. Over the course of this project, I analyzed a series of ceramic variables to test a model of ceramic production and its potential relationship to intra and inter-community ritual practices during the socially and politically dynamic Middle Preclassic period. Without physical loci of production in the region like kilns, the model tests markers of production, paste, form, surface treatment, and firing to reconstruct the organization of production and the decisions potters made throughout. Decisions that were influenced by and embedded with the surrounding sociopolitical, ideological, and economic domains in which they were made. Using a multi-stage integrated methodology, I confirmed that early Shanantanich was a node of inter-community and indeed inter-regional network that likely gathered at the monumental site for activities like feasting and the construction of the astrological complex. However, it also revealed that rather than participants in inter-community activities at early Shanantanich, residents of San Lorenzo likely performed complex intra-community rituals at home, supplied by hyper-local community potters. These findings should lead us to reconsider assumptions about the relationship between monumental sites and surrounding hinterland communities in the Middle Preclassic that are often based on a single marker of sociopolitical or economic scaling, such as monumental constructions. And with that, I would like to thank again the organizers at HENB for this wonderful symposium, as well as my committee members, friends and family, colleagues in multiple countries and funding agencies who made this work possible.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ella Bekeshi. I'm one of the co-directors at Heritage Education Network Belize. And I just wanted to thank Dr. Villarreal for expanding our understanding of the Middle Preclassic ceramic economy in the Mopan River Valley. I'm sure there are plenty of questions about this topic. And speaking of questions, we would like to remind our audience that the Q&A segment is scheduled for the end of each session. So please put your comments and questions in the comment section on Facebook or YouTube for our presenters to see and answer during the Q&A. And this morning's first session Q&A will start around 10 o'clock Belize time. So get your questions up before then and we will address them. To move on, our third presentation is by Professor Scott Simmons and also co-authored by Dr. Tracy Mayfield. Professor Simmons is an anthropological archaeologist interested in learning about ancient economies among Maya groups in coastal Belize. He is striving to understand how ancient Maya communities related socially and economically with each other through time, how and why economic relationships between island and mainland Maya remain stable or changed, and also the ways Maya island communities demonstrated cultural resiliency during periods of social and economic stress. The San Pedro site late post-classic and historic occupation on Ambergris Caye, Belize is our third presentation for this morning.
I'm Scott Simmons, and I'm looking forward to talking with you a bit about our recent archaeological research in San Pedro town on Ambergris Caye. But before I do, I just want to thank the organizers for inviting me and for organizing this fourth K.U.L.C.H.A Symposium. So today I'll be presenting the results of several seasons of fieldwork at the San Pedro site conducted by the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Work has revealed evidence of late post-classic period Maya occupation, probably 15th to early 16th century, as well as 19th and 20th century use of the site by caste war refugees who settled the area that's now San Pedro. So I'm going to talk about both of these periods of occupation today. The San Pedro site is located immediately west of Central Park in the heart of downtown San Pedro. It's one of at least 24 archaeological sites that have been recorded so far on the island, although there are undoubtedly many more. Ground truthing and mapping of sites and other cultural features will hopefully take place on the island next year following a recently completed LiDAR survey. The San Pedro site was first investigated by Drs. David Pendergast and Elizabeth Graham in 1991 and 1993 on the grounds of what was then called the Sands Hotel, owned by Mr. George Parham. It's not clear when the Parham family arrived on Ambergris Caye, but by the end of the 19th century, they were well established on the island. After excavating through 20th and then 19th century deposits, Graham and Pendergast identified hard-packed earth and marl or sascab-like Maya house floors, in which a number of post and pit features, as well as human burials, were found. So that's me standing in the background of this image looking slightly perplexed, as is often the case. Anyway, nearly all of the Maya burials that have been found at the site were ventrally placed with legs flexed, a burial practice observed at several other sites on Ambergris Caye, as well as at K.U.L.C.H.A and Lamanai on the mainland of northern Belize. So in spring 2016, I visited the site where I'd worked with Graham and Pendergast in 1993 and saw that the old Sands Hotel was undergoing a major renovation project in which the hotel was becoming a hostel. Unfortunately, construction workers had dug several trash pits into the site, effectively disturbing the historic and late post-classic deposits Pendergast and Graham had identified more than 2 decades earlier. After introducing myself to Ms. Maria Parham, the granddaughter of George Parham, I learned of further renovation plans for the property that included extensive permaculture work and the possible construction of a large swimming pool, both of which had a very high potential to disturb the site. So Ms. Parham agreed to allow us to conduct salvage excavations there through a UNCW archaeology field school in the following year, 2017. So here I'll begin by discussing the historic occupation of San Pedro town, then proceed to summarize what we've learned about late post-classic Maya occupation there. A total of 9 trenches measuring between 2.5 to 3 meters squared were excavated over 2 field seasons in 2017 and 2023 by me, co-PI Tracy Mayfield, and UNCW Archaeology Field School students. Excavations revealed historic, modern, and Maya features and abundant artifacts dating from probably the mid-15th to mid-16th centuries through the mid to late 20th century. Yet very little Spanish colonial period material has been found so far. The site appears to have been abandoned by the Maya sometime by the middle of the 16th century at the latest, probably due, at least in part, to near continuous pirate and privateer raids on coastal Maya settlements for food, slaves, and other materials. Excavations at the site revealed that pre-Columbian cultural material was mixed with both modern and 19th century historic artifacts up to around 50 to 65 centimeters below the existing ground surface. mixed 19th century historic artifacts, and late post-classic period Maya materials, including well-preserved bone, along with numerous ceramic and lithic artifacts, were found to extend to roughly 65 to 90 centimeters below the existing ground surface. So here, note the ovate biface made of chert from the northern Belize chert-bearing zone, resting inside a whiteware pomade jar in the upper left of this slide. The site itself is situated just around 50 meters from the eastern shore of the island, so the mixing of stratigraphic deposits is almost certainly the result of the numerous hurricanes and tropical storms that have washed across it over the past centuries. Some historic and modern construction activities are also responsible for the mixing of stratigraphic deposits, particularly over the last century or so. In terms of historic material, over 11,250 artifacts were recovered during our 2 field seasons, including these intact late 19th century patent medicine bottles. Based on archival and other historic research conducted by Dr. Courtney Besaw, the 19th century historic material represents household refuse from caste war refugee families who migrated to Ambergris Caye during the last quarter of the 19th century. Following the late post-classic period, human occupation of Ambergris Caye seems to have been very light. Only small numbers of Spanish colonial artifacts, mostly Maiolica and olive jar fragments, have been recovered during excavations, and 18th century artifacts are almost equally uncommon. The island was not uninhabited, however, as fisher folks from the mainland sailed to the Caye to fish its rich waters during the 18th and 19th centuries. Recolonization of the island began in earnest sometime during the last quarter of the 19th century, and this is when groups of caste war refugees arrived from the Lake Bacalar region of southern Quintana Roo, located only about 55 miles northwest of San Pedro town. In addition, some Maya families also emigrated from villages farther north, around Tulum in northern Quintana Roo. The majority of historic cultural materials date to between 1830 and 1900, and not surprisingly, the bulk of the assemblages was related to foodways. After plates, bowls, and cups, just over 6% of the ceramic artifacts were from chamber pots. You can see one of these on the left here. Mayfield interprets the wide variety of forms, colors, and designs seen in the historic ceramic assemblage as representing refuse from multiple early San Pedrano households, rather than from just a single household. In other words, our excavations on the grounds of the old Sands Hotel, which became the Hostel La Vista, may have uncovered portions of a communal dump for household refuse. A wide variety of types of ceramics were recovered, including hand-painted pearlware, such as the pieces shown on the left image, along with Chinese export porcelain, transfer print, and sponge-decorated whitewares, and yellow and annular wares. Glass artifacts included numerous liquor bottles, tumblers, and patent medicine bottles, while metal artifacts included a variety of nail types, hardware such as door and furniture hinges, and belt buckles seen in the slide on the right. The mean ceramic date for historic pottery from all trenches combined was 1893, while the mean production date for glassware recovered was also 1893. Although no historic features were identified during excavations, what is very clear is that the earliest founders of what became San Pedro town had access to an incredibly diverse range of consumer items, and that the most common of these, ceramic and glass objects, had originated from many different parts of the world, including North America, Europe, and Asia. Beneath the refuse of 19th and 20th century occupation, we encountered largely intact late post-classic period Maya deposits, including the remains of house floors, subfloor pit features, human remains, and numerous ceramic and lithic artifacts. The majority of the latter were obsidian blades and blade fragments. Largely undisturbed late post-classic Maya midden was found beginning at about 80 to 90 centimeters below the ground surface, and Maya house floors were encountered between about 90 and 100 centimeters below the existing ground surface. So we saw multiple reflooring episodes in several trenches, and dark gray-black midden with well-preserved faunal material was often found sandwiched between these floors. Not surprisingly, the majority of faunal remains were fish bones, although preliminary analyses by Mayfield indicates that different terrestrial animals, including deer, peccary, dog, and a wide variety of birds and small mammals, were consumed by the late post-classic Maya of San Pedro. Fish species inhabiting deepwater environments, along with those commonly found within the reef and in lagoon shallows, were represented in the faunal assemblage, along with crocodile, turtle, and manatee. In addition, hundreds of conch shells and shell fragments were also recovered. Dr. Jim Amers studied the 11,300 plus Maya ceramics recovered from the site in 2017 and last year. His study has provided the basis for dating Maya occupation of the site to the late post-classic period, as red Pail group pottery comprised the overwhelming majority of Maya pottery found at the site, including these palmul incised vessel fragments. Hubelna unslipped and Navula unslipped sherds comprise the other main ceramic types. Excavations at the San Pedro site yielded 4 intact or nearly whole Maya vessels, including this very small red pail jar. A small number of Poso unslipped sherds were also identified by Amers, and these spanned the early to late post-classic periods. And less than 10 sherds were identified as classic period vessel fragments. Sherds of the red Pail group, or Tulum red, dominate the ceramic assemblage, as they do at a number of other coastal sites in Belize and Quintana Roo. Their presence suggests to Amers and Graham northern and coastal trade connections for the San Pedro Maya. Given the high densities of fish bones in midden deposits, it's not terribly surprising that fishnet or line weights were recovered in those same contexts, along with lesser numbers of ceramic spindle whorls. Interestingly, several of these net or line sinkers, called pesas, appeared to have been made from Belize group ash-tempered sherds, suggesting coastal connections to the mainland, specifically the Belize River Valley. Dr. James Stemp studied the 310 Churton chalcedony pieces, along with the 424 obsidian blades and blade fragments that make up the lithic assemblage from our 2 field seasons at the site. His visual inspection suggests that over 3/4 of the obsidian blades came from the K.U.L.C.H.A source, while the remaining pieces were either from K.U.L.C.H.A or an indeterminate source or sources. Most of the whole blades and proximal blade pieces had ground or peck striking platforms, which, along with the K.U.L.C.H.A source identification, is consistent with observations made on obsidian from other late post-classic Maya contexts. The majority of chert flakes and tools were made from chert from the northern Belize chert-bearing zone. Thin bifaces such as the losange, lenticular, and laurel leaf forms shown here are identical to those made during early and middle post-classic times at the K.U.L.C.H.A workshops. The San Pedro Maya evidently curated and repaired or recycled these, as evidenced by resharpening on many and conversion of some bifaces into pounding tools or hammer stones. At least some of these finely made bifaces were likely used for spearfishing and manatee hunting. So walking through San Pedro's Central Park today, it's difficult to imagine what that area would have looked like 150 years ago, when the resident population of the island was a fraction of what it is now, and when one would have only seen a series of small wood frame buildings that housed Caste War refugees from Yucatan. It's equally challenging to envision small clusters of pole and thatch domestic buildings strung out along the beach ridge that made up the Maya community that existed around 500 years ago. Yet archaeological investigations in what is now a busy urban environment have revealed not only the presence of these early San Pedranos, but certain details of their daily lives, including some of the ways they adapted to life on Belize's largest barrier island. In terms of its pre-Columbian past, the San Pedro site is unique in that it is one of very few late post-classic Maya period sites that have been identified and investigated archaeologically along the coast of Belize. Our work there has revealed that in the last century and a half or so before Spanish contact, the San Pedro Maya lived in pole and thatch houses with either hard-packed sand or sascab-like floors. Along with ceramic storage vessels, they laid their dead under their house floors, continuing a long-standing pre-Columbian Maya practice. They also enjoyed access to a wide variety of aquatic and terrestrial foods, as well as stone tools made from chert from the northern Belize area and obsidian from the Guatemalan highlands. After a period of at least 4 centuries, the area that eventually became San Pedro Town was recolonized by Caste War refugees from the Lake Bacalar and Tulum areas of Quintana Roo. These families had access to a wide range of consumer goods from distant parts of the world, including North America, Asia, and Europe. They lived in elevated wood frame houses and enjoyed aquatic foods from the Caribbean and the shallow waters on the west side of the island, along with a variety of meats from domesticated animals such as cow, pig, and turkey. Many of the descendants of these refugee families still reside on Ambergris Key today. So the Parham family has recently sold the property on which the San Pedro site is located, making it unclear what will happen to the remains of these first San Pedranos. What is clear is that the earliest Maya, as well as the later residents of what became San Pedro Town, were well adapted to life along the coast of northern Belize.
Thank you, Professor Simmons and Dr. Mayfield, for new insights on Maya occupation from Ambergris Key. I'm very interested in the great temporal spread that we've represented in this session, showing the long history of cultural and economic practices across what is today Belize. And to that point, we're going to wrap up our session on exploring Belize's past fully in the colonial period. Our final presentation is brought to us by Dr. Christine K.U.L.C.H.A. Dr. K.U.L.C.H.A is a political anthropologist. Her research is focused on the Yucatec Maya of Belize and Mexico, and she uses ethnographic, oral historical, and archival methods to critically examine colonialism, war, religion, and evangelization. She is the author of Maya-British Conflict at the Edge of the Yucatecan Caste War, published by the University Press of Colorado in 2023. Her current project examines competition among Maya residents, British mahogany companies, and the British Honduran colonial government in the 20th century. Dr. K.U.L.C.H.A will now discuss Straddling a Border on the Colonial Construction of Indigenous Egality.
In K.U.L.C.H.A, the title of my paper is Straddling a Border on the Colonial Construction of Indigenous Illegality. In the modern geopolitical imagination, borders are typically crossed unidirectionally. Nation-states define and fortify borders, individuals properly belong to one side, and those who do cross do so in one direction, seeking to gain something on the other side. Less well understood, however, are the processes that generate trans-border living, or straddling a border, in which people routinely cross borders. Such border hoppers are cast as illegal, or at the very least transgressive and suspect, tainted by their rootlessness. However, the politico-economic conditions that generate such straddling of borders are critical to understand if just and humane policies, including those of Indigenous land rights, are to be fashioned. This paper traces the colonial construction of Indigenous illegality in the borderlands between Mexico and British Honduras in the late 19th century. Several factors rooted in European imperialism created the conditions in which Indigenous Maya people had the best chances of physical survival, making a livelihood, evading debt, and remaining free of bondage if they routinely crossed the presumed border marked by the Ondo River. This creative strategy of transborder living, however, earned them the opprobrium and suspicion of British Honduran officials and employers, and cemented the misperception of them as immigrants, thus setting them up for subsequent exclusion from collective land rights. In the Westphalian international system, we tend to think of the world as divided into territorially bounded nation-states into which individuals are sorted. Citizens have homelands in which they belong, and those who cross the border are out of place, aliens, unless and until they submit to a process of legalization. This geopolitical model rests upon an assumption that the default position is fixed settlement rather than mobility. This model is extended to Indigenous people within settler colonies. The general expectation is that they have a fixed homeland from time immemorial. Consequently, when it comes to Indigenous land claims, the only question is that of determining the boundaries of that fixed homeland. However, what if these baseline assumptions are wrong? What if, historically, mobility is just as common as fixed settlement? More to the point, what if borders or lines separating imagined political spheres actually trigger cross-border movement? Political borders, their qualities, and the patterns and frequencies of cross-border movement are all variables that change over time. The differential distribution of goods and regulatory schemes on either side of a border sets up imbalances that stimulate cross-border flows. I use the term trans-border living to refer to patterns of frequently crossing a border in both directions when movement across an imagined border becomes part of one's routine habits and comprehensive strategy for living. The supposed border between the newly imagined colony of British Honduras and the newly independent nation of Mexico in the 19th century serves as an excellent example of how the creation of a border stimulated cross-border flow and ultimately created a category of indigenous immigrants. This audience knows that British settlement in the region was initially motivated by timber extraction. Treaties in 1763, 1783, and 1786 conferred upon England the right to extract timber in the region upon certain lands claimed by Spain. When the British defeated the Spanish at the Battle of St. George's Caye in 1798, that convinced British officials of their sovereign dominion, and they claimed the Ondo River as the northern border of what they came to call the colony of British Honduras. For the indigenous Maya people of the region, of course, the Ondo River posed no barrier to their movements. Since the pre-Hispanic period, the region was routinely traversed by traders and farmers in search of new garden plots, among others. In the 16th century, when Spanish colonists raided indigenous settlements and established exploitative patterns of forced labor, tribute, and resettlement, primarily in the northern half of the peninsula, thousands of Maya fled these depredations, seeking refuge south of the river, where the Spaniards had very little control. These were long-standing patterns of movement across the Ondo River, but that line was not yet considered a border between polities, not really until the late 19th century. At that time, under the aforementioned treaties, British loggers were granted use rights to extract timber, first logwood and later mahogany, from the area between the Ondo and Belize rivers, thereby establishing the Ondo River as the imagined northern limit of the British settlement. Enslaved Africans and African-descended people were the primary workers on the logging crews, and in a pattern identified by Matthew Restall, these enslaved people frequently fled across the limits of the British use rights region in order, they thought, to escape bondage and find freedom. Such patterns of flight rested upon a recognition of certain limits as delineating Spanish versus British territory. The cross-border flight of enslaved people, in other words, served to define the borders as real. The borders consequently existed not only in the minds of British colonialists, but also in the minds of escaped slaves who acted with reference to those imagined borders. The borders became real as people adjusted their strategies in relationship to them. At the same time, in the late 18th century and through the mid-19th century, in the northern part of the peninsula, regimes of taxation and the alienation of communal indigenous lands facilitated the proliferation and expansion of large-scale commercial plantations. Thousands of Maya workers became trapped as indebted servants, but many escaped southward into the region increasingly plied by British loggers. Here again, flight across the Hondo presupposed a boundary separating Spanish, and later Mexican, territory from British territory. Once again, flight motivated by the desire to find freedom within a new polity helped bring into existence a spatial division between territories. The patterns of cross-border movement discussed thus far, enslaved people fleeing northward and indebted peons fleeing southward, were unidirectional. The emergence of regular trans-border movement, frequent movement back and forth across a line, began in the mid-19th century, triggered by the social war of Yucatan, more commonly known as the Caste War. In violation of prior Anglo-Spanish treaties, British merchants sold copious amounts of guns and gunpowder to the Maya rebels while purchasing mahogany timber from them and shipping it to markets in the US and Britain. Mahogany became a primary source of war financing for two groups of armed Maya fighters, the K.U.L.C.H.A rebels and the Pacificos, who brokered peace with the Yucatecan government in 1853. Individual logging crews routinely extracted timber from both sides of the Hondo River, which was efficient, but in violation of British and Mexican territorial claims. Guns and gunpowder were also transported by canoe up the Hondo River. The river, therefore, became a conduit of illicit trade. Both Yucatecan and British officials began inspecting canoes moving along the river, which was the first manifestation of border securitization. Beginning in 1848, thousands of Yucatecans of both Maya and Spanish descent fled the violence to the north and resettled south of the Hondo River, where they expected to be safe in British-claimed territory. In the meantime, most of the northern British Honduran region was claimed as private property by a very small number of timber companies, most notably the British Honduras Company, later known as the Belize Estate and Produce Company. In the absence of open land upon which they could settle, the Maya from the north ended up as tenants on British-owned land, paying rent and providing the workforce for landowners, including those who were keen to take advantage of their knowledge of sugarcane and rum production. In a short period of time, Yucatecan patterns of trapping laborers in cycles of debt were adopted by British Honduran landowners and timber companies. Consequently, those crossing the Hondo River hoping to find freedom would again become trapped in debt servitude on the other side of the river. But perhaps they could cross the river once again and keep up this cycle of debt and flight across the river indefinitely. Those best able to preserve their freedom were those who could manage to farm their own garden plots and who kept their expenses to a minimum. In the era of land monopolization, though, where were they to find open farmland? North of the river, the two armed Maya forces offered Maya settlers the right to farm on land the soldiers had secured in battle, but with the proviso that they submit to a military draft and pay rent. Under these conditions, remaining solely on one side of the river was a sure path to debt servitude, military raids, forced military service, or all three. Consequently, in the 1860s, a new pattern of trans-border living emerged, in which many Maya farmed to the north of the Ondo River on lands claimed by one of the armed Maya groups, but they erected their houses south of the river. By doing so, they aimed to evade the obligatory military service and paying rent on their garden plots. This strategy was risky because Maya soldiers would cross the river to capture those whom they considered deserters and absconded debtors. Moreover, the Maya residents still had to pay British landowners rent for their house lots. However, when finding themselves in a jam on one side, they could cross to the other and hopefully start with a clean balance sheet. In the 1860s, consequently, a series of new Maya settlements sprang up on the banks all along the river, settled by these border hoppers, people who found trans-border living to be their best chance of survival and freedom. In 1868, when the British Honduran government formed a frontier police, naturally they were concerned with the cross-border movement of armed fighters and munitions. Of equal concern to them were these trans-border residents, whose presence as debt absconders and deserters attracted raids by Maya fighters. In a curious twist of fate, then, to forestall Maya raids into presumed British territory, the chief of the frontier police began collecting rent in villages on the southern banks from people who were said to owe it to the Maya armed groups whose lands they farmed to the north of the river. The Maya who lived along and routinely crossed the Ondo River obviously pursued a creative strategy of survival, taking full advantage of the fact that different polities claimed the right to regulate affairs on opposite sides of the river. Their trans-border pattern of residence and mobility presupposed this spatial political division, and the concentration of houses along the river constituted a material manifestation of that border. Routine and strategic crossing of this line in one direction and then the other, therefore, both presupposed and instantiated a boundary between two territorially distinctive policies. In sum, the border and transborder living were mutually constitutive. For the Maya, though, this pattern of transborder living had regrettable long-term consequences. Among the British, the Maya people living in villages along the river gained a reputation as both disloyal and a nuisance. In addition, in those riverine villages clustered people involved in a variety of illicit and shadowy activities: munition sales, armed rebellion, smuggling, escape from imprisonment, unlicensed rum production, and timber theft, in addition to desertion and dodging debt service. Notions of illegality compounded notions of disloyalty and nuisance. Despite long-standing patterns of settlement and mobility throughout the region, the Yucatec Maya in British Honduras were cast as immigrants. Characterized thusly, they generally have been unable to make a successful bid for collective lands as indigenous people. The creation of a territorially based colony, therefore, transformed indigenous residents into a suspect immigrant group, not directly, but indirectly through generating the conditions that
Thank you, Dr. K.U.L.C.H.A, on this perspective. Sorry for that slight technical error in your conclusion, but hopefully we will have some questions up for you in our next session. We really appreciated your perspective on the colonial period and how multiple communities navigated those moving spaces. And I think that we will all really be reflecting on the realities and how that carries through to the modern day, not only in Belize, but across the world. So we want to thank all of our presenters for this session for their insightful presentations. We're now going to open the floor to our audience for a live Q&A. Please put your comments or questions in the comment sections, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube Live. Ask those questions and we'll be able to put them up online on the screen for our prospective presenters to answer. So I'm going to welcome everybody to the stage right now so that we can get our Q&A started. Hi, welcome everybody. Hi. And I am also part of this Q&A session, so I can read out the questions for my other presenters and participators for you guys to answer. Hopefully we can have a great discussion session. So our first question, we can go in the order that was presented just to kind of make it easier for our audience as well. So our first question will be from Marie, I believe. Oops. For Ms. Ramoulet, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I am interested in the textile imprinting on ceramic figures. Do these impressions look like they're made before firing as part of the figure's design, or might figures have been wrapped in textiles before deposition?
Hi, I hope you can hear me. For this question, the thing is that in this case, it's really something that was made before it was fired. For the imprints to be really within the ceramics, there's, in this case, it's a voluntary one, but there's also some kinds of involuntary one. For example, when the potter is using a petate or a textile to put his or her ceramics when he's doing it. In the case of bundled ceramics, it would be different kinds of imprints, for example, calcification or textile remains. But this kind of very deep imprint would be only most of the time and because of a, well, before firing actually. The only other way to have imprints like that in ceramics is when they are imprinting, for example, in the residues inside the ceramics. In this case, not really on the ceramics, but on the residues. So yeah, I hope it answers the question.
It really does. I think that's interesting to get texture on certain sections. I love ceramics, so I'm going to geek out over that as well. But you also kind of get interesting insight into the weaving craft as well, because you can get the weave and the weft and like that, right?
Yeah, we can completely reconstruct the textiles sometimes, so it's very precious because actually it's like 90% of the textiles we have. So these kind of imprints are very precious for the understanding of Mayan textiles.
That's amazing. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
And then I also asked a question, so I'll just put it up here for the broader audience. But do you see comparisons between the patterns displayed on those, either in the ceramic artifacts or on lentils and things like that? Do you see a comparison between those and, for example, patterns we see on like huipiles and other garments that are made by modern weavers? And kind of asking, like, do those patterns persist into the modern day? Oh, hold on one second. I think you got muted. Where are you? Oh, you muted yourself. Are you able to unmute? It's okay. While you figure that out, we can definitely jump to another person. Technology is sometimes, a little bit more difficult. I can answer a question while you're figuring that out, no problem. James Bacon asked, would it be advantageous to widen the ceramics comparison study to other nearby Middle Preclassic sites such as K.U.L.C.H or El Pilar, or even sites to the west of X for further comparison? So yes, that is the short answer. I did do this. I was unfortunately not able to include that in a 15-minute presentation. Hopefully I'll be able to collaborate with archaeologists and ceramicists at those sites sometime in the future and present on that. But the short answer is I did do that. It's really interesting. With NAA, you can compare sites across an entire region, and the University of Missouri keeps back material so that as more tests are done across the region, more comparisons can be made. So previous NAA has been done at K.U.L.C.H, as well as a couple other sites in the Upper Belize River Valley and in Guatemala. So I was able to compare my data with those sites and found that we were producing, I wasn't there, that ancient Maya potters were producing their pottery hyper-locally. So the recipes and ratios that were used in the Mopan River Valley were not spread across the broader region. However, there are samples that I tested from early X that do match samples from K.U.L.C.H. They just weren't the Mars orange ware that I talked about. So some of the Ook red and other early K.U.L.C.H types were similar to ceramics that were made at K.U.L.C.H. And we actually had an outlier who was an outlier in every test I did. It was an Abileno red, which is from the Peyton Lakes area. So we have evidence that came from that area because it matches NAA results from that region. So there was already this very long distance trade of ceramics, at least, that was going into early X by that time. So, which is quite a few kilometers away. So it was a really interesting result. Thank you for that question. Marie, how are we doing with the mic?
Yeah, I guess it's
perfect. I think you had been talking about, whether the patterns went in.
Yeah, actually it's quite a complex question, but of course there's patterns that can be seen. For example, diamonds are still in use today, and they are part of the most recurrent patterns that we can see, especially in iconography. In the case of the archaeological record is much more complicated because we don't have a lot of patterns or colors that are discovered because they are still tiny fragments. But there is a link, and this you more than anything you can see it on the techniques that are used, because the basis techniques are still the same between the past textiles and the modern textiles. So I think that trying to understand better the technological way of creating textile, we will see more and more technical links. So it's still a huge and complex question, because is a pattern has the same pattern, the same symbolics in the past and in the present, and so is it the same pattern or not? It's quite philosophical, but that's a real question. But here there is link, and I think we can clearly say that it is a generational and millennial culture and techniques actually. So.
That's so interesting. I really love that. And, in our region, with no preservation really at all, unlike, South America, this is a really interesting project to kind of use other lines of evidence to study. So I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, no problem. And then we had another question for my paper, and then we will move on to the second half papers. So Rebecca asked, how do we identify volcanic materials in ancient ceramics? And where would these materials have come from, since we do not have volcanoes here in Belize? So if you were listening to my talk and were asking yourself where this volcanic material comes from, it actually, again, is coming from very far west in Guatemala, there are a series of volcanoes that way, on closer to the Pacific side of the country. So that's where they're coming from. We have this really long distance exchange going on. This is a hot topic for ceramicists, especially in the Middle Preclassic, about where this material comes from. You can see it in the petrographic slides. I kind of briefly went over them. I'm happy to share images or anything like that if you want to reach out to me. But volcanic material is really identifiable in petrography. It behaves a very specific way. It actually has a very distinct Y shape, and that has to do with how hot the material is when it comes out of a volcano and air bubbles moving through it. So it's really distinguishable, but the question is, how did it get to the Belize River Valley in order to be used in pottery? And based on what I found in my material, I believe Mopan River potters were importing the ash itself as a raw material and then using it as they would any other mineral additive. But there's no real evidence for volcanic material that's washed in from the river in natural clay beds that are available today. And there was no evidence of it in natural clay from the past. So I think they're definitely bringing it in as a resource, which is really interesting because it's quite far away. And the river systems through Guatemala and Belize definitely help with that movement. But again, you know, moving a raw material that far definitely means that it's has a significance. They were seeking out volcanic material for a reason. It actually helps the pottery fire at a much higher temperature, so you can get these kind of vitrified, almost glassy pots, and it's hard to get that without adding volcanic material at the temperatures they were using back then. So it's my belief that they sought that out intentionally so that they could make these fine wares even more special and use them in ritual spaces. So I hope that answers that question. I will also move on to some questions for Professor Simmons. We have a few. Let me find it. So the first question, I think people were really drawn to your conversation about the key itself. So this first question is possibly off topic, which I don't believe it is, but how did the Maya people living on Ambergris Key handle or survive hurricanes? You know, we've just had quite a few hurricanes come through the region recently. Is there any evidence from those events that you found?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the question. I, assume that we don't see archaeological evidence for specific kinds of adaptations to hurricanes or individual storms, but I think the assumption is that most people were, pretty adaptable, pretty resilient. They, picked up where literally picked up their scattered belongings and started again, depending on the severity of the storm. We can see from archaeological deposits, though, that there's quite a lot of mixing of the soils that have taken place. We find modern artifacts that are over a meter below the existing ground surface. This isn't all attributable to human action, humans digging trash pits or post holes for, pole and thatch houses or houses that are, elevated to protect from storms. But I think it must have been quite a challenge for people living so very close to the ocean. And to try and regroup after big storms like that, it must have been pretty challenging, but somehow they did it, because there's near continuous occupation at some level or another of the island, and that just kind of points to the human resiliency factor, I guess, if you want to call it that. Yeah, it's a good question, though.
Definitely, I agree. And I think in light of, bringing the past into the present and the future and sustainability, it's a great way to segue that topic as well. Speaking of, we also have another question. It was discussed that Ambergris Caye had strong coastal trade connections. How do you see these trade connections change over time going into the colonial and later periods?
Yeah, so good question, Ella, and thanks for all your work at Henby, by the way. Yeah, so we can see it in the pre-Columbian past by the presence of different kinds of materials that aren't locally available to folks living on the Key. The easiest examples are ceramic types that appear up and down the coast. This is the Tulum red, as it's been called, or the red Pail group material. But you could also see it, of course, in the obsidian that's coming from Highland, Guatemala, like the ash from those ceramic sherds that Alessandra was just talking about. In colonial times and post-colonial times, right? So there are a handful and literally a small number of Spanish colonial period materials. So 16th century materials, maybe some 17th, early 17th century materials. And these are also pottery. So Mayolica is the tin glazed earthenware, and olive jar sherds, which are from originally vessels that held olive jars, but were used for a lot of different things. They're pretty hardy, sturdy vessels. But boy, there's not much Spanish colonial stuff at all, to be frank. And not much from the 18th century either. But when the caste war begins and we see people moving in from those different places in Quintana Roo that I mentioned, boy, there's a lot of the ceramics are coming from everywhere, every part of the world, it seems, the glassware too. Probably people were getting through their materials through British trade connections that were probably pretty long established and had been brought to Belize by British colonists. But it's really it boils down to differences in material culture, what's available to the local groups, and then what had to be imported because it was produced elsewhere. Yeah, so I hope that helps you answer your question, Ella.
I think it does. And I think that's actually a really good segue into Dr. Kray's paper, because, we do have evidence of that kind of movement of goods as well in the colonial period on the mainland. So I am going to put up a question for Dr. K.U.L.C.H.A really quickly. And this is from Dr. Cynthia Robin on YouTube. Thank you for your presentation. Could you please comment more on the implications of your research for land tenure today, as you were discussing at the end of your talk? So it did get cut off a little bit there. I'm so sorry about that technical difficulty. But yeah, if you could kind of bring that back to us, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it was only the, I'm sorry, there's reverb here. I think that was only like the last few words of the final sentence that was cut off. So it's okay. Hi, Dr. Robin. Thank you for that question. Don't get me started on talking about land rights because I have a lot to say on that. I really believe that there is enough evidence. If there were Yucatec Maya in Belize, right, who wanted to make the case for land claims, I think there is enough, at least, right, to get started on that. I'd love to see more archaeologists working on the 18th century in northern Belize to help provide more evidence of Maya occupation at that time. There, a lot of the evidence that comes that we have about Maya occupation in northern Belize in the 18th and then the early 19th century pre-caste war comes actually from Mexican archives and Guatemalan archives, and British documents published in other sources like travel accounts and things, rather than official records in the British archives. And I've written elsewhere about how there seems to have been sort of a strategy in the presentation of archival records to downplay the presence of Northern Maya during the colonial period, because they simply were a nuisance, right? From the British perspective, they wanted to claim, rightful dominion, and they made the case, or they tried to make the case that they entered an uninhabited land, right, and could claim the right to dominion and to owning vast stretches of land because they entered this open space when it wasn't completely open. And so the Southern Maya, the K.U.L.C.H.A and the Mopan, have been mobilizing for land rights in the South, and have had some successes along those lines. And again, I think if the Yucatec Maya wanted to organize for land claims, I think they would have a good shot at it, especially given what I was talking about, how colonial forces basically created the conditions where people could survive best by going back and forth across the Ondo River. And so they essentially, to survive, they had to sort of make themselves illegal, right? Immigrants. And yeah, the consequences, of course, are now in the present. Even today, right? British sources will claim that the Yucatec Maya, or that all the indigenous people, were immigrants who arrived after the British occupation.
And I think that it's interesting to think about that in the perspective of tangible heritage and kind of this session, and what role does the work that archaeologists do, or the work that we do highlighting that tangible heritage, what role does that play in potential land right claims, if we're able to make those links? Because like you said, these colonial powers defined the need to move around, but also defined the rule that you're supposed to be settled in one area to make that land claim. So they did it on purpose, I'm sure. But oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's great. Yeah, you put it perfectly. It was a catch-22. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you guys so much for answering those questions. I think they will really allow all of us to reflect moving forward through our next sessions about the role of these cultural endeavors, these economic endeavors, and how they play into each other. So I'd like to thank all our presenters from this session, and would like to invite everybody to come back after lunch. We will be reconvening at 1 p.m. Belize time, in a new session. So a new session will go live at that time, and we will have great further discussions for our afternoon. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we will see you shortly.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.